deal because, frankly, the synergies between the two companies are difficult to find. There is practically no complementarity between the two companies. They are on the same markets. They have the same products. The brands are very, very similar. So in a certain way, from one side, Nissan, it's a desperate move to try to find the future. And from the other side, Honda, which, if I understand well, they were not very excited about this move. But, you know, you have to count with Métis in Japan. That means the Métis had a big say into it. So at the end of the day, they're trying to figure out something that could marry the short-term problems of Nissan and the long-term vision of Honda.
Do you think Nissan is being do you think Honda is being pushed into this deal by the economy ministry? There's politics pushing this deal, Carlos, rather than the value of the deal?
Without any doubt for me. That means having lived in Japan for so many years, I understand how influential can the Métis be. And I can tell you that from all the data that I received about the performance of Nissan, which has been miserable for the last, at least for the last 2 to 3 years, they have cash problem, they have investment problems, they're being really hammered in the United States. They got practically out of Europe. They're being challenged in China, and there is no plan in front of it. So I can tell you that there is panic mode inside Nissan.
Well, if they're in panic mode, it then pushes the idea that the economy ministry, as you say, are in a do whatever it takes moment for Nissan?
Yeah, well, there is, in my opinion, there is no industrial logic to it. But as you know, there is a moment where you have to choose between performance and control. Obviously, if you can have both, it's the better. But there are moments where you have to choose. And without any doubt, with the Métis and everything I know from it, they prefer control on performance. So they pushed Honda into the deal without any doubt.
Well, with that in mind then, Carlos, what kind of backstops? I mean, you've dealt with the Japanese, you've dealt with Nissan, you understand the metrics to get these organizations together. Is the government going to have to deliver backstops to Honda to make this deal work?
No, I think they in a certain way tried to push Honda onto this deal. Obviously, Honda must have some kind of benefit out of it, if not on the short term, at least on the mid and the long term. But that will be closely monitored to make sure that the impact on the Japanese society is not going to be too big. Because, you know, when you have two companies of this size and practically in the same market with practically the same strengths and the same weaknesses, there are going to be a lot of costs to be taken out, and there are going to be a lot of duplication to be taken out. So this is going to be closely monitored by the Métis.
You doubt that the synergies are there, though?
Well, I can tell you that it's on the short term, I don't see too much synergy. Obviously, you go to the classical one, which is purchasing together to try to leverage a better scale. But this is something that Nissan has done with Renault successfully in the past, except that at this moment, it's really concentrated in Japan. It's three Japanese companies which have very similar products. The image of the brand are not very different from one to the other. I'm including Mitsubishi into it. So it's going to be very tough. But on the long term, they can save on future investment by doing the investment one time in technology, doing it one time and sharing it with three companies.
Let's just press a little bit more on this. It's going to be tough, as you say, to get the synergies. It's driven by the Ministry of Economy. So there's a political dynamic to this. Is this Japan creating, putting two companies together to really try and stand up to the competition from China? Is that part of the narrative here, Carlos?
Without any doubt. It makes a lot of logic today. The Chinese automaker are on the winning side. They became, as you know, the largest exporter of cars. They are the largest maker of EV. They are being successful in a lot of new technology. They're doing fine cars. So in a certain way, yes, it's a defensive mood. It's a defensive mode that's going to be trying to shore up the Japanese industry and avoiding a cataclysm, first a social cataclysm in Japan, and particularly to try to reinforce these companies on the foreign markets.
Foxconn have put on pause their interest in participating in this deal, Carlos. They had a meeting with Renault. It obviously didn't go according to what they wanted. Is there only a Japan solution for this? Is there only a Japanese savior for Nissan, in your view?
I don't see him for the moment. Obviously, in the team existing today at Nissan, usually you can measure the team by the results they get. That's the only way you know if somebody is capable of doing something. Frankly, when you look at the last 5 years, the results are not a good testimony of the strengths of the team. Will they be a savior? I don't know. I know how tough it's going to be, because you need to understand that Honda is an engineering organization. It's very strong in engineering, and Nissan is very proud of its own engineering. So the battles here to try to decide what technology is going to be adopted by the new company, or by, if it's a merger, or by the new alliance, I can tell you it's going to be very tough. I've been dealing with this for many years. I remember when we took control of Mitsubishi, Mitsubishi was not afraid of the collaboration with Renault. They were afraid of the collaboration of Nissan, because they know how tough it's going to be when engineers meet together. And there is this pride of my solution is the best solution, which always is an obstacle to develop serious synergy for the future.
Well, of course, you're going to have cultural issues when it comes, even if they're two Japanese firms. I think the point I was trying to get to, Carlos, was, do you see the only solution being a Japanese to Japanese merger or joint venture? Do you see any possibility of an overseas company like Foxconn being allowed into this house?
Well, the approach of Foxconn, when I heard about it, was very interesting, because it is something innovative. It is something that would have put Nissan in a completely different path. But the fact that you're telling me now that they are posing on it, they are very realistic people. They know they cannot do it against the will of the government of Japan, and particularly of the Métis. And now you need to know also that in Renault, the French state has a big say, because they are a very influential shareholder in Renault. And I'm sure that the decision of pause is coming from the fact that they know the Métis is not very favorable, and probably the French government doesn't want to upset the Japanese. I've been witness of how much the French government is bending backward to please the Japanese in the past, unfortunately.
Well, look, I know that there's ongoing issues between yourself, the Japanese, and the French, etc. But you have a ringside seat at many of those meetings. Is this, briefly before we talk about the global auto industry, Carlos, is this Renault's moment to exit? Do you think that that's what they hope for, or do you think they really do want an equity participation?
Oh, no. I mean, this alliance has been, since 2020. It's not a surprise. I told you that the alliance is a zombie. It's an appearance of an alliance. There is an appearance of a collaboration, but there was practically no collaboration at all. I think what Renault, after having the benediction, the blessing of the French government, is trying to maximize its asset inside Nissan. They're trying to get the most money out of their share. But they will, in my opinion, they will sell to Honda without any doubt.
Carlos, let's just broaden the conversation a little bit. You've lived and breathed this industry. You've seen the evolution of the Chinese electric vehicle market, the strength of the auto industry in China become. Are you surprised about how strong they've become so quickly?
No, not at all. Frankly, I've seen the signs of it when we entered China, when I was heading Nissan, and we entered China in 2003, and we started building our plants and organizing the engineering. In a very short period of time, I would say 7 or 8 years after we built the plants in China, the Chinese plants were at the top of the ranking from all our plants. I mean, we were comparing the productivity, the quality, the time to market of the Chinese plant compared to the Japanese plant, or to the US plants or the European plants. And the Chinese came to number one. It's a very disciplined workforce. They are very, very eager to compete into this industry. So I think this industry in the next 20 years is going to have to deal with the Chinese talent and the Chinese know-how.
Well, Carlos, you were known as Davos man, I think. You were the voice of free trade every January. The world is bracing for a next round of trade disruption from Donald Trump. Every CEO of an auto company out there probably has their own personal thoughts, but they probably can't really express them. You can. You're free now. As the auto CEOs line up, what can they not say? What do you think they're thinking, but they can't say?
Look, if you, that means this is an industry which is by definition a global industry. You can't survive as an automaker if you are restricted from accessing any market in the world. Size matters, investments are huge, economy of scale are extremely important. So this industry is living on globalism and globalization. So I think it's very bad news for all the automakers to know that there are going to be tariffs and there are going to be obstacles for them to be present in all the market. This will translate into a lot of them having problems and certainly a higher price for car in all the markets.
Do you think you'll see a major auto failure in 2025, Carlos?
Well, there is no auto failure. There are, in a certain way, companies that are so weak that somebody else comes and buy them. When you look at the market capitalization of Nissan today, it's really very small. And I can understand that the company like Foxconn, headed by very serious and realistic management, is going to say, you know what, instead of us investing to do our own electric car, let's buy a car company. They're not going to be the only one to try to do that. Instead of building something from scratch, you can take control at a relatively cheap price of an existing car manufacturer, get rid of everything you don't need, and really concentrate on what's important for you for the future. I'm expecting a lot of moves like this in the future, particularly for the weaklings of the car industry.
This is 59th Street in Manhattan. Below it, spread across downtown and midtown Manhattan, reside some 684,000 New Yorkers. That's more than the population of Vermont, residing in just under 9 square miles or 23 square kilometers of land. Or that's a population density of about 76,000 people per square mile, making Lower Manhattan singularly dense by American standards. If this were a city by itself, it'd be the country's most densely populated, far outcramping current number 1, Gutenberg, New Jersey, just across the river, where a fifth of its 12,000 residents are stuffed into a single building complex. If it were its own county, its population density would almost double the nation's second most dense, Kings County, New York. And for similarly dense cities to Lower Manhattan, you'd need to go abroad, where it would rank around Kolkata, Kathmandu, and Makati, comfortably within the world's top 10. But 76,000 per square mile only begins to tell the story of just how cramped this area really is. New York City also has the most office space by square footage of any city in North America, and just Manhattan by itself contains some 81% of that. For comparison, Los Angeles, the city with the second most such space at 432 million square feet, is dwarfed by Manhattan's 592 million. With so much space comes a flood of commuters every morning, adding another 1.2 million or so people to the southern end of the island. For the workday then, an area of just 9 square miles has a momentary population of about 2 million. 2 million that need to get to work, 2 million that need to run errands, and 2 million that need to get back home at the end of the day, which, for a majority, means getting back out of Manhattan. But while this sub-city urban core that's more populous than a handful of American states is uniquely large, uniquely mobile, and uniquely stuffed, for the past century, effectively the age of the automobile, there's really been no unique solution or system for managing or limiting traffic. Aside from a prohibition on right turns on red and honking, driving in America's densest 9 square miles works the same way as in the other 3.8 million square miles. Because of this, each and every workday, some 140,000 commuters enter Manhattan by car, while about 1 million people enter the commercial business district south of 60th Street by automobile, largely for only the price of the gas it takes to get there, the toll to cross the bridge, and the cost of parking. All expenses that a rural American would scoff at, but expenses that hardly reflect the shared costs that cars create in the US's most densely populated environment, from air quality and pedestrian danger to simple quality of life. The result is this. New York's #1 standing in INRIX's 2023 congestion impact ranking, where the average driver moved at just 10 miles or 16 kilometers per hour and gave up about 101 of their hours a year to sit in traffic-related delays. And those are stats for the whole of New York City. Manhattan was far, far worse. While most streets and avenues are limited at 25 miles per hour, average traffic moves at a glacial 7 miles or 11 kilometers per hour. This is not a new problem either. Rather, it's one that's just getting worse. In 2010, the average taxi navigated the Central Business District, or Manhattan below 60th Street, at 9.1 miles per hour, and every year following through 2018, it slowed. While COVID lightened the congestion for 2020 and 2021, experts are now saying that traffic hasn't only returned, it's gotten even slower than before 2019. Now, the exact complexion of the problem has shifted over the years. The number of daily vehicles entering the core business district, for instance, has dropped, but their impact has been replaced by an ever higher share of for-hire vehicles servicing ride-hailing apps and clogging the city streets. But the very root of the problem is so remarkably simple. There are just too many cars. Now, oftentimes in an urban context, a problem may present as simple and straightforward enough, but a solution can be anything but. That, though, is not necessarily the case here. In fact, as long as car congestion has been an issue here, one potential answer remained equally obvious, equally straightforward, equally simple: disincentivize driving into Manhattan. Going as far back as the 1930s, mayors have proposed tolls to cross into Manhattan over the East and Harlem rivers to raise city funds, or in the 50s, to raise money for the subway. In the 60s and 70s, such ideas were again returned to in an attempt first to popularize mass transit use, then to make progress towards meeting the standards of the 1970 Clean Air Act. Further hoping to pressure individual car users, Mayor John Lindsay thought to reduce city parking in the business core, while Mayor Ed Koch in 1979 looked into banning private cars entirely. For half a century, New York City leadership has understood that in order to clean its air and/or support its mass transit systems, it's needed to make it harder or more expensive to drive from New Jersey or Queens or Brooklyn into Manhattan south of 60th. And yet, it's never happened. But it has come close. It started with a speech outside the Museum of Natural History when then-Mayor Michael Bloomberg introduced the idea by name: congestion pricing. It was just one of many components to his larger Plan YC initiative introduced on that Earth Day in 2007, but one of the boldest. From below this line, any car entering Manhattan from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday would pay $8, while trucks would pay $21 per daily entry into the zone. Taxis would be exempt of the fee, as would emergency vehicles and those with handicap license plates, and any vehicles skirting around the perimeter aiming not to enter Manhattan, but to get around it, so someone driving from Brooklyn to the Bronx by way of FDR Drive wouldn't have to pay the fee. The tolls would be collected by Easy Pass readers so as to not slow down vehicles, and the toll money itself, 100% of all net revenue, would be invested back into city transit. The project was bold. But between transit experts, bureaucrats, and elected officials, it was popular. State Governor Elliot Spritzer, Representative Joseph Crawley, and even presidential candidate Barack Obama supported the plan, while the U.S. Department of Transportation supported the initiative by awarding the city $354 million in grants should it commit to embracing new tech and infrastructure to combat urban congestion. The MTA also strongly supported the program as it accelerated its own capital planning process to align itself with the congestion legislation. On a hurried timeline, it introduced its largest ever spending program of $29.5 billion for the next 5 years, hoping to cover subway fleet expansion, the rehabilitation of 44 subway stations, the purchase of some 2,500 new buses, the replacement of 57 miles of mainline track, and the catch-up on general maintenance across the transit authority's property. And beyond bold and broadly popular with most politicians and bureaucrats, congestion pricing was proven. In recent years, Stockholm and London had experimented with congestion pricing in their downtown cores and were so far experiencing major benefits. Mass transit systems benefited from the influx of investment, city residents benefited from the increase in air quality and calmer streets, and even those that chose to begrudgingly pay the fees benefited from the smoother traffic conditions. But just like in London and Sweden prior to adopting congestion pricing, the idea wasn't popular among all residents. At one point, polling of New York City showed that 61% of all respondents opposed the move, with numbers from the other boroughs even higher, as 70% of all Bronx area respondents opposed the idea. Opposition was especially vocal in areas like eastern Queens and southern Brooklyn, where access to public transit was more difficult, and thus representatives argued such fees would unfairly burden their constituents. Then across all of New York, there was a shared sentiment that New Jersey commuters were getting away without paying their share, as fees for Jersey commuters wouldn't be meaningfully increased because the tolls they already paid to cross in Manhattan would cover their congestion fee. And then there was one claim across the city that's come to follow congestion pricing, that it's elitist. Congestion pricing, some correctly claimed, would impact the working and middle-class car commuters more than their upper-class counterparts. An $8 fee for the pleasure of commuting would be a much larger proportional chunk of someone's workday expenses if they work making $15 an hour instead of $150 an hour. Following such logic then, congestion pricing could be painted as a means to rid the roads of working-class commuters, forcing only them to figure out new commute routes, while the city's elite were able to now drive into town with increased ease for a price that they could more comfortably cover. Congestion pricing passed in the city council, but once it made its way to the state assembly, Democratic lawmakers representing the city outside Manhattan blocked a vote, missing the federal funding deadline and killing congestion pricing on the spot. Ultimately, New Yorkers had proof that they understood that this was a feasible solution and that congestion was a real problem worth addressing, but the solution got hung up on issues as to whose cars exactly were to be limited and who exactly would benefit the most from such a program. But what's easy to miss, and was missed by the opposition in 2008, and not made clear enough by proponents in 2008, was exactly how elegant and ingenious a solution congestion pricing really is. You see, a universal truth of traffic is that everyone values their time differently depending on, well, a lot of things. Where they're going, whether they're on time, why they're driving, etc. And then these varying values translate to different monetary values based on differing income levels. An average income person driving into the city just for a visit on their day off might value their time in traffic quite low, say $10 an hour, meaning they'd theoretically be willing to pay $10 to eliminate that hour of traffic, but any cost above that, and they'd rather just wait it out. But in the car right behind them, there might be a person of the same income level who's late to their first meeting of the morning. They might value their time quite highly, maybe $100 an hour, as the consequences of the delay from traffic are far higher. They'd pay an enormous amount to eliminate traffic in that scenario. Theoretically, it'd be fair and good for both these drivers if the high value of time person paid the low value of time person to cut in front of them, and do the same with plenty of others in order to get to their destination faster. In some places, this effectively happens through tolled express lanes, but that's not practically feasible in Lower Manhattan. What is congestion pricing. In it, the person valuing their time higher is paying, say, $15 to drive on the roads, and that $15 is effectively going to the low value of time person who's been priced out of driving. That's because that person would get pushed onto public transit, and so if congestion charge fees go to public transit, as is typical, it's funding improvements that make transit better, faster, or cheaper. But this is, of course, an overly simplified reality, and it only considers the benefits to individual car users. In practice, there are plenty of upsides to freeing up the roads, even for non-drivers, due to all the other scenarios where time is exceptionally valuable for a particular vehicle type. For example, with the bus. With 10, 20, 30 or more people, even if their individual value of time is low, the collection of all of them means one bus can have a value of time well into the hundreds per hour. Delivery vehicles are a similar scenario. In fact, research by the Federal Highway Administration suggests that shippers value transit time between $25 and $200 per hour. Everyone who buys anything in Manhattan effectively pays for any disefficiency in goods delivery, so it's a scenario where the cost of traffic get passed on to everyone. And perhaps the greatest example is that of ambulances. A report by New York State Senator Brad Holman Segal and former NYC Traffic Commissioner Sam Schwartz pointed out that between 2014 and 2024, New York EMS response times for life-threatening emergencies increased by 24% from 6.09 to 7.54 minutes. Not all of that increase can be directly attributed to traffic, but a lot can. Half, in fact, according to their analysis. Minutes matter during life-threatening emergencies. As the report points out, in cardiac arrest, a person's chances of survival decreases an average of 7 to 10% for every additional minute before medical intervention. With a stroke, each additional minute is linked to the loss of an additional 1.9 million brain cells, meaning New York City traffic quite directly leads to increased disability for stroke victims. Right now, the cost of driving in Manhattan is so low that there are plenty of people doing so even when it's barely worth it to them. But with buses and delivery vehicles and ambulances using these same roadways and having their extremely high benefit to society diluted by the congestion caused, in part, by the low value of time drivers who have little disincentive to driving, the net benefit to society of Manhattan's roads is lower than it could be. That's to say, everyone that could take a fast crosstown bus, everyone who buys goods brought in by delivery vehicles, everyone who might need an ambulance would benefit from congestion-free roads, but they can't capture that benefit now because there are all these drivers out there that only barely want to be driving. But the logic goes further. You see, traffic is not a linear phenomenon. That's to say, every additional vehicle does not have the same effect on how much it slows down traffic. The impact of an additional vehicle varies depending on how congested the road already is. On a highway with a 70-mile-per-hour speed limit, it's expected that the roadway can have a throughput of up to 1,120 cars per hour per lane while still maintaining 70-mile-per-hour average speeds. As the number of cars using the highway increases, their density increases, and therefore the average speeds decrease. At 32 cars per mile per lane, for example, speeds slow down to just 64 miles per hour, but even with the slower speeds, the higher density means the roadway's throughput still increases to 2,048 cars per hour. The roadway is being used more efficiently as an asset, even as the efficiency of individual journey times gets lower. This phenomenon continues as speeds get slower and density gets higher, up until a point. According to the analysis behind this set of numbers, on a 70-mile-per-hour highway, that tipping point is 53 miles per hour. At that speed, 2,400 cars get through a lane in an hour, but it's not really ever theoretically possible to get more than 2,400 cars per hour through one of these lanes. While the intersectionless highway is the simplest example, this same phenomena occurs on all roads with any congestion. There just is a theoretical maximum throughput that roads can't surpass, and overloading the road actually decreases its efficiency below this maximum throughput. The factors that lead to this phenomena are numerous, varied, and not universally agreed upon or understood, and even the ones that are wildly complex, often being studied through the theories of fluid dynamics, but there are at least some examples of the nonlinear nature of traffic that make intuitive sense. Thinking about the scenario of a long line of cars at an intersection, let's say it takes the first driver at the light a half second to react to it turning green. That's a half second of time lost by everyone in line as it delays all of their arrival to the light. Let's then say it takes the driver second in line another half second to react to the first driver moving. That's now a full second of delay for everyone behind them. Now, if there are only 5 cars in line, this isn't a big deal, as the fifth driver only loses 2.5 seconds to the cumulative inefficiencies of human reaction times. If there are 20 cars, though, that's 10 seconds. Since every car has to wait through that whole backup, the difference in travel time between a lightly congested intersection and a heavily congested one, in this example, is about 10 seconds. And even that's assuming they all get through in the same light cycle. Now, once again, this is only one small facet of the overall phenomenon. There are a myriad of different factors that compound and decrease efficiency exponentially as roads get congested, but the takeaway should be that considering traffic is exponential, there's a lot of logic in reducing vehicle numbers at least below the tipping point to the point at which roadways are most efficient. Manhattan's roadways are consistently well above that point, and congestion pricing is the best idea for how to fix that. Of course, all these benefits are understood by the people who care most about this issue. Certainly not every New Yorker, but what's proved enough of them to keep the concept alive a decade and a half after its failure in the state assembly. As of the end of 2024, congestion pricing in the central business core of New York City is the closest it's ever been to becoming a reality. The policy is set: $9 per commercial vehicle in 2025, then likely $12 in 2028 and $15 in 2031. The 100-plus gantries required to monitor roads and dole tolls are in place too. Now, all that's left to do is survive the new year in its first 4 days until the program goes live on January 5th. But even with Governor Kathy Hochul's green light, transit experts are still holding their breath, and justifiably so. It was on the back of the spectacular public meltdown of the MTA in 2017 that congestion pricing returned into conversations over how to again fix the city's crumbling public transit. As the New York Times noted, the $500 million a year that congestion pricing would have generated could have gone a long way to alleviating the city's unraveling transit disaster. Governor Andrew Cuomo, for his part, took a more future-forward stance, that congestion pricing was an idea whose time had finally come. And yet, since its time arrived, there have been 2 state governors, 2 city mayors, a pandemic, a handful of lawsuits, and when the project was finally on the verge, a pause from Governor Hochul in early 2024. In so many ways, congestion pricing as part of Fix NYC initiated by Cuomo has played out as Bloomberg's congestion pricing as part of Plan YC initiated a decade before it. The more recent one was able to get the votes at the state level, but has run up against similarly heavy political opposition in different forms, from outlying towns, the state of New Jersey, and Donald Trump. But perhaps the most confidence-inspiring as to the long-term prospects of such a program is the longevity of those that 2008 and 2017 proposals drew from, the congestion pricing models in London and Stockholm that have remained in place for 2 decades now. Each has now played out slightly differently, as Stockholm's has kept total cars and congestion lower than London, but London has made real strides in turning fees into additional bike lanes and bus routes, but both remain success stories that New York's drawn from. And likely most instructive for the New York urbanists is the fact that congestion pricing became acceptable to Londoners polled and popular with those polled in Stockholm, popular enough to remain policy and even survive rate hikes over the years. So with history as a guide, what's most likely to happen is a continued bitter fight over New York's new tolls until the very hour they're implemented, but then, slowly, as the streets get clearer, the air gets cleaner, the noise quieter, the subway's better, the ambulance is faster, New York will slowly learn to love paying $9 to speed through lower Manhattan. Speaking of learning to love paying for something, over 500,000 people have done so with our sponsor, Nebula. Seriously, we know people like it because a majority of people that have ever signed up for a subscription are still subscribed, which is well over industry averages, especially for a service that's been running for almost 6 years. But I think I know why. It starts with the fact that Nebula has curated a group of thoughtful creators making unique stuff, and we all post all our normal stuff there ad and sponsorship free. But really the core of Nebula, and what people seem to enjoy most, is the originals. You see, the reason Nebula is a paywalled, subscription-based streaming platform rather than an ad-supported one is that we believe that the business model is better for both creators and the audience. We're able to make stuff at a higher budget than what the ad-supported YouTube system can support, which has led to plenty of really great originals. For example, Great Cities by City Beautiful, covering the backstories of the urban planning of places like Venice and Shanghai and Paris. There's the brand new Boomers by Tom Nicholas, a feature-length documentary about the consequences of the increasing power and wealth amassed by the baby boomer generation. There's WTF USA by TLDR News, covering the US election and its aftermath in real time from a digital-first mindset. I could go on and on and on, but it's worth checking out the catalog yourself, and it's worth knowing that the 2025 original slate is the most ambitious, most frequent, and highest budget to date. For example, we just announced a new project that my team and I are working on called Abolish Everything. It's a long-running, live New York City comedy show where comedians come and make their case for abolishing something in front of a panel of the political establishment that pokes holes in their argument and makes the case for why actually we should keep things the way they are. It's hilarious, and we're redeveloping it into a film show for all the Nebula viewers to see. So if you want to see that and all the other great Nebula originals, and watch all our normal stuff ad and sponsorship free, and help support Wendover, and all the other independent creators on Nebula, well, good news, because you can do so for 40% off when you use our link, nebula.tv/Wendover.
A sinkhole. Follow me, kids. Geronimo! Sacagawea!
So long, losers! Uh-oh.
The top of his head is still showing. Claw at it. Well, they're China's problem now.
Look, those idiots don't even know where we live. No!
Monster! You monster!
Did you see the news?
Honey, come on, we have bigger problems. But I'm so angry. You're a woman. You can hold on to it forever. Okay. Homer, you have to go out there, face that mob, and apologize for what you did.
I would. I'm afraid if I open the door, they'll take all of you.
No, we won't. We just want Homer.
Well, maybe not you, but they'll kill Grandpa. I'm part of the mob.
Teeny, take out the baby.
Here, let me get that for you.
Stay back, I gotta change.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. You know, we always try to pick topics that we think you'll find interesting, and today we're going to be looking at something that might surprise you: the collapse of communist federations. So we're going to be diving into an excerpt from eponymist Branko Milanovic's blog, where he breaks down what he calls the 3 steps to freedom. He argues that republics in the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia followed an almost identical pattern when they broke away. And even more interesting, this pattern is like a mirror to some separatist movements that are happening today.
It is pretty fascinating. You know, he noticed this pattern while he was reviewing a book about the fall of the Soviet Union. And even though the book didn't come right out and say it, the Soviet republics all seem to follow this 3-step process, almost like a blueprint.
Okay, so let's break down this blueprint. Step 1 is cultivating national grievances. Now, you might think that this is like all about, outright rebellion and things like that. But Milanovic actually points to a much more subtle approach. Intellectuals and dissidents kind of planting these seeds of discontent.
Exactly. It's not about storming the barricades right away. This first step is all about kind of shaping the narrative, like tapping into frustrations that are already there and then directing them towards that central power. And what's really wild is that it's just as effective today as it was back then. If you think about it, certain groups, even in democratic societies, use feelings of being marginalized or injustice to kind of get what they want. It all comes down to the power of a good story, especially one that, makes people feel like they've been wronged.
So it's almost like building a case.
Right.
Laying the groundwork. And Milanovic gives us a really interesting example from the Soviet Union. Valentin Rasputin, a really celebrated author, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a dissident writer who was exiled, he calls them soft and hard dissidents. So Rasputin kind of worked within the system, subtly challenging the status quo with his writing. While Solzhenitsyn, despite being silenced, became this symbol of resistance.
Yeah, they both played huge roles, even though their approaches are totally different. Like Rasputin, because he was published and well respected, he could introduce ideas that question the system from within. But Solzhenitsyn, on the other hand, he really showed the flaws of the system just by being someone that was punished for speaking out. So together, they kind of chipped away at the legitimacy of that central power. And that got the ball rolling for what came next.
So you've got this undercurrent of discontent brewing. What happens next?
Well, this leads us to step 2, exploiting the weakening center. As that central power of both the USSR and Yugoslavia started to crumble, opportunistic leaders in the republics, they saw their chance and they took it. The really crazy part is that a lot of these leaders, they were communists their whole lives. And then suddenly they became champions of nationalism.
Whoa, talk about a plot twist. So
Yeah.
they basically switched sides when they felt the power shifting.
Exactly. It's like they were just waiting in the wings, ready to grab power by tapping into those grievances that were already simmering. A great example of this is Boris Yeltsin. He went from being a Communist Party boss to, the poster boy for free enterprise. He completely changed his tune.
So he saw which way the wind was blowing, and he adjusted his sails, but how did he manage to pull off such a dramatic change?
Yeltsin was a pro at reading the room. He could feel that people were getting disillusioned with the communist system. And he was really smart. He positioned himself as the champion of a new independent Russia. It was a savvy move, maybe a little cynical, but it really highlights how opportunistic political leaders can be.
Right place, right time. Okay, so the stage is set. We've got these seeds of discontent that have been sown. The central power is kind of on shaky ground. And these ambitious leaders are ready to pounce. What's the final act in this drama of secession?
This is where things get really good. Step 3 is the break and its consequences. So those Republican parliaments, often controlled by these newly emboldened nationalist leaders, they start taking some real action, like defying federal laws, seizing assets, even withholding taxes. It's a real power move, a declaration of autonomy.
So they're putting their money where their mouth is. Or actually not putting their money where the federal government wants it. Milanovic compares this to what we're seeing today with separatist movements like in Catalonia or Scotland.
Yeah, the parallels are pretty amazing. In both cases, you see these really strong regional identities. People feel like they're being wronged by the central government. And you've got political leaders who are pushing for more autonomy, even full-on independence. The big question is, how far are they willing to go? And how will the central government respond? If things escalate to the point where they're openly defying the government, like seizing assets or not paying taxes, it can have some serious consequences.
And we don't have to look too far back to see how messy things can get. Think about Yeltsin and how he dealt with Gorbachev. He basically refused to pay all of the taxes. It was like he was saying, take it or leave it.
Oh yeah, it was a huge gamble.
Yeah.
But it shows just how high the stakes were. These moves were bold. They were willing to break the rules and risk a showdown with the central power. Yeltsin's gamble paid off. But you got to remember that these kinds of actions can have unpredictable consequences, and those consequences can last a long time.
Speaking of consequences, things rarely end neatly with just a political breakup, do they?
You're telling me. Even when the whole secession process seems pretty straightforward, territorial disputes often become a major flashpoint, leading to, conflict and even war.
It's like trying to untangle a giant knot. You might loosen a few strands, but you're probably going to create some new ones in the process. And we're not just talking about ancient history here. Milanovic even brings up the war in Ukraine and how it started with border disputes with Russia. It's a stark reminder that things aren't always as settled as they seem.
Yeah. The situation in Ukraine is a tragedy. It just shows how historical claims and competing interests, especially over things like land and resources, can come back to bite you even decades after a separation. It really underscores how tricky it is to draw borders and how fragile peace can be after empires fall apart.
So even when countries break away, they're often dragging that baggage of the past along with them. It makes you wonder, what role does democracy really play in all of this? Is it really a force for peaceful separation, or is it just a tool that can be easily manipulated?
That's a great question. And it's one that Milanovic really grapples with. It's something we're going to explore more when we come back. But before we do that, let's take a quick break.
Welcome back, and just to quickly refresh everyone's memory. We've been talking about these 3 steps to freedom that Milanovic lays out. You've got to cultivate those national grievances first. You need that narrative that really gets under people's skin, gets them riled up. And then when the central power starts to weaken those opportunistic leaders, they see their chance and they jump on it. They exploit that discontent that's already bubbling away. And then comes the actual break, the separation, those bold actions that make it official. But like we've been saying, even when a break seems pretty clean, those territorial disputes and all the baggage from the past can come back and cause new trouble.
Yeah, it's a bit of a reality check, isn't it? Freedom doesn't come easy, and that road to independence is really a smooth one. It's true. But you know what I think is interesting? Milanovic doesn't just paint this like super bleak picture. He actually hints that there might be other ways to do this. He points to Czechoslovakia and Malaysia when they split up. They managed to do it relatively peacefully. Not like all the crazy conflicts that we saw with the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia.
That's a good point. It gives us a little hope. So what made those separations different? What can we learn from them?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one that a lot of scholars have been trying to figure out. There's no easy answer. But I think a couple of things probably help them transition more peacefully. One is that both Czechoslovakia and Malaysia already had a decent amount of autonomy for their different regions. There was already this kind of decentralization, which probably made the whole separation thing a little smoother.
So it wasn't this sudden jarring break. They already had a system in place for dealing with those differences and for respecting those regional identities.
Exactly. It's like they had already laid the groundwork for a more amicable split. But the second thing, and this might be even more important, the leaders in both countries, they were actually willing to compromise. They put dialogue ahead of confrontation. They understood that this whole winner-takes-all approach wasn't going to help anyone in the long run, and that a negotiated settlement, even if it meant giving up some things, was in everyone's best interest.
So it wasn't just about the structure, it was also about the kind of leadership they had, the ability to deal with all those complex emotions and all that baggage from the past, and to do it with maturity and foresight.
You got it. It takes wisdom to realize that sometimes letting go is the best way to keep the peace and to build a stronger future, even if it means parting ways. But even in those cases where it went relatively well, I'm sure there were still some bumps in the road.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, no separation is ever perfect, is it? There are always going to be disagreements and loose ends and things that could cause tension down the road. But the main difference seems to be in their approach. They were committed to finding peaceful solutions and to building a new relationship based on respect and cooperation, even after they went their separate ways.
It's like the difference between a conscious uncoupling and a nasty divorce. It's about realizing that even with all those deep divisions and all that bad blood, there's always a choice. You can make things worse, or you can try to find a better way forward.
That's a really good point. It's easy to get sucked into all that divisive rhetoric and all that conflict. But these examples show us that there are other ways to deal with these tough challenges. And, it makes me think about all of us out there listening. We're constantly bombarded with news about conflicts and divisions. It can feel overwhelming, like there's no hope.
I know what you mean. But it's important to remember that you're not powerless. The choices we make, the way we deal with these issues, they can actually make a difference. It starts with being informed, with really understanding what's going on and why.
So instead of just reacting to whatever's in the headlines, we should take a step back and try to understand those deeper historical and political forces that are at play.
Exactly. And it's not just about understanding the past. It's about using that knowledge to create a better future. We can choose to keep repeating those same cycles of conflict, or we can break free. It starts with us as individuals, with how we treat each other, how we talk to each other, how we hold our leaders accountable.
So in a way, Milanovic's analysis is kind of a call to action. It's not just about dissecting history. It's about using what we learn to make better decisions in the present.
That's it. It's about realizing that history isn't something that just happens to us. We're actively shaping it. And when we look at these examples of secession, both the good ones and the bad ones, it reminds us that the road to freedom and self-determination, it's complicated and it's full of challenges. But it's a road worth traveling. It's a road that demands our attention, our critical thinking, and our active engagement.
Now, before we wrap things up, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier. You mentioned that Milanovic thinks democracy kind of played second fiddle in these revolutions, that it was more like a front for nationalist ambitions. That's a pretty cynical take. But is there any truth to it?
It's definitely a controversial argument. And it sparked a lot of debate. I wouldn't say that democracy is always a facade, but I think Milanovic's point is that it's easy for people to manipulate democratic processes, especially when things are chaotic and uncertain, when people are scared or angry. They're more likely to fall for charismatic leaders who offer easy solutions to really complicated problems. And those leaders, they often take advantage of those fears and anxieties to gain more power for themselves.
So it's not that democracy is inherently flawed, it's that it can be vulnerable to people who want to exploit it for their own gain.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for us to be informed, to really think critically about the information we're being fed, and to be wary of leaders who try to oversimplify things or who appeal to our worst instincts.
So it's about being vigilant, about not taking our freedoms for granted, and about actively participating in shaping the future we want.
Absolutely. But there's one more thing that Milanovic brings up that I think is crucial. It's his observation about how even when secessions seem to go well, they can still be messed up by those lingering territorial disputes. He uses the example of Yeltsin and how he suddenly changed his mind about Ukraine's borders after that failed coup in 1991. It just shows you that even when you think everything's settled, those unresolved issues can come back to haunt you.
That's kind of scary when you think about it. It's like we're always walking on eggshells, never knowing when something's going to crack beneath our feet.
That's why understanding history is so important, not just as a bunch of stories about what happened in the past, but as this living force that's still shaping our world today. Those ghosts of past conflicts, they could stick around for generations. And it's up to us to face them, to learn from them, and to find ways to heal those old wounds.
It's a big job, but it's something we have to do if we want to create a world that's more peaceful and just. And it brings us to a final question for our listeners. Are there any movements happening right now that might be on the verge of a break? And if so, what can we learn from history to make sure those transitions are as peaceful and as constructive as possible?
That's a really good question. It challenges us to look beyond what's right in front of us, to really dig into the complexities of history, and to realize that even when things seem stable, there's always a chance for conflict.
And being aware of that, being vigilant, that's crucial if we want to build a future that's more peaceful and sustainable.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, we've covered a lot today, from the fall of those communist federations to the challenge. All right, everyone, get ready for this, because today we are going deep, really deep into European club football.
And we're not just talking out of our hats here.
Nope, we've got the ultimate playbook. UEFA's brand new report just came out.
And let me tell you, this thing is massive.
Huge. Attendance transfers, player usage, competition formats. I mean, you name it, if it's happening on the European pitch.
It's in this report.
Absolutely. So consider this your cheat sheet.
Because we are going to pull out the most interesting stuff.
The juiciest bits, just for you.
And what I find really interesting is that UEFA's vision, their big idea of a united, sustainable football ecosystem.
Right.
It's woven through every single page of this report.
It's like their blueprint, their master plan.
For where the sport is going.
And speaking of the future, one thing that really caught my eye, and I mean, it really jumped out at me, was the growth of women's football.
Incredible.
Attendance was up 38% last season.
Wow.
That's not just growth. That's like a full-on explosion.
Totally agree. It is really encouraging. And what I like is that the report really reflects that importance.
Yeah.
It doesn't just give a little mention to women's football.
Right.
It really dives deep into all the trends and challenges.
Dedicated analysis.
Yeah, dedicated analysis that's shaping the future of the women's game.
Fantastic. Okay, well, let's talk about all these fans. I love a good stat. And this one is a head scratcher.
Okay.
We're talking about the most attended clubs, the top 20. No surprise, Man United's number 1.
Right.
But get this, Dortmund is number 3. Dortmund.
I know. It's amazing.
They're not exactly, Real Madrid or Bayern Munich.
True. You wouldn't think of them as like a traditional big club in that sense, but Dortmund's fan culture.
It's incredible.
It's amazing, legendary. And their stadium, that atmosphere at the Westfalen Stadion.
Electric.
It's famous for a reason.
Yeah.
And they're always, or almost always, up there in European competitions.
Yeah.
Which definitely brings in the global fans.
Right.
But they haven't lost that local connection.
Makes you think, right? I mean, is it about having all the superstars, or is it about just creating a club that the fans just really connect with?
Yeah.
Like a real sense of belonging. And this whole Dortmund thing, it just proves it. Speaking of passionate fans, how about those German Cup numbers?
Oh, yeah.
Especially in Berlin.
Yeah.
An average of 69,000 fans per match.
I know, it's crazy.
That's more than most Champions League games.
It really is. I mean, the thing about the German Cup, it's a knockout tournament, right?
Yeah.
So every single match.
Oh, the stakes are high.
The stakes are so high, exactly, yeah. And of course, Berlin, it's the capital, adds to the excitement.
Adds to the allure.
It really does.
It's like a cup final every time.
Exactly.
Okay, let's move from the stands to the boardroom, talk about transfer trends. Summer 2023, absolutely wild, right? Transfer window spending, record-breaking.
That is crazy.
Bonkers. But this year, things cooled down a bit. In fact, an 8% decrease in spending. What happened?
Yeah. I think maybe we're seeing the end of those crazy, reckless spending days.
Yeah.
Because even though clubs are bringing in record revenue,
Yeah.
there's much more focus now on that financial sustainability.
Yeah.
You know, UEFA's financial fair play rules are getting a lot tougher.
Right.
And I think clubs are being a lot more careful, especially with those big tournaments, you know, like Euro 2024 coming up.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's like they're realizing, you know, long-term health is better than a short spending spree.
Right, exactly. And what about those big money superstar transfers? All those blockbuster deals that used to dominate the headlines?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? Top 10 deals this year,
Yeah.
down 33% compared to last year.
Wow.
Are we witnessing the end of the Galactico era?
It's a really interesting question. It does seem like there's a big shift
Yeah.
towards investing in youth. Club academies are becoming more and more important.
Oh, for sure.
And young players,
Yeah.
they're demanding higher fees than ever before.
So it's not just about buying the finished product anymore. It's about developing that talent from the ground up.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just about who has the most money. It's about who has the best scouting.
Right.
And the most effective youth development programs.
And the clubs that are doing it right, they're seeing the rewards.
Absolutely.
Belgium and Hungary, they actually broke their transfer earning records this year.
Wow. That's incredible.
Like these hidden talent factories, just churning out top prospects.
It really shows you, right? There are so many different ways to succeed in the game. You don't have to spend hundreds of millions on superstars.
Right.
You can create a sustainable model by focusing on young talent.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see what's happening on the pitch itself. One thing the report highlighted was that clubs are using more players than ever.
Oh, yeah.
Like on average 30 per season. What's driving that?
Well, one thing, you know, with that expanded substitute rule now,
Yeah.
5 changes per match.
Right.
Managers have more flexibility. They can rest those key players.
Mm-hmm. And that ties into that whole player well-being thing.
Absolutely.
That UEFA emphasized in the report's forward. I'm picturing all these players thanking their lucky stars for those extra subs.
Oh, for sure, especially those midweek fixtures.
Absolutely.
But it's not just the number of players. We're also seeing this trend with match length, and it's pretty crazy. Get this, matches exceeding 100 minutes.
100 minutes.
They're becoming way more common, especially in England.
Wow, 100 minutes. It's like we're entering the era of extra time football. Are we going to be turning into like cricket matches over here?
Right.
I might need to pack a sandwich for the next game. But seriously, what's going on? Why these marathon matches?
It's all about added time.
Okay.
You know those new directives that encourage refs to add on the exact time lost for goal celebrations, substitutions, set pieces, injuries, all of that?
Yeah.
They're really trying to crack down on all that time wasting.
Right.
So in theory, we should be seeing more actual football being played. I mean, I can see how that appeals to the fans. Nobody wants to watch a player rolling around on the pitch for 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
After a tiny little knock.
It disrupts the flow.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I do have to wonder about the players. I mean, isn't this going to make their already crazy schedules even more brutal?
It's a good point. And it's a big debate right now in the football world. You know, some people, they argue these longer matches mean more fatigue, more risk of injuries.
Right.
But others, they think this added time, it'll actually lead to a more tactical, strategic game as everyone adapts to this new reality of playing longer.
I guess it's kind of a double-edged sword then.
It is.
More action, more drama, but also putting more strain on these athletes.
Exactly. And it will be interesting to see how it all plays out, you know?
Yeah.
Will teams change their training? Will we see more squad rotation? Will the transfer market be affected by needing players who can handle all those extra minutes?
So many questions.
So many questions. And it'll be interesting to watch it unfold over the next few years. Well, one thing's for sure. It's going to be interesting. This whole added time situation is just another twist in the never-ending drama of European football. But, you know, speaking of twists,
Yes.
let's talk about the report's emphasis on locally trained players.
Interesting.
It seems like clubs are starting to realize how important it is to nurture that homegrown talent both in their domestic leagues
Yeah.
and in UEFA competitions.
Absolutely.
And there are some clubs that are really leading the way here.
Oh, yeah.
Shakhtar Donetsk and Real Sociedad, for example, they had a really high proportion of locally trained players in their Champions League squads this season.
That's great. And it's not just about sentimentality. There are actual strategic benefits to this.
Oh, yeah.
Developing those homegrown players, it strengthens the bond with the fans. It means you're less reliant on those expensive transfers.
Yeah.
And you have the potential for building something really strong long term.
It's like creating a whole football ecosystem within the club itself, right?
Exactly.
Where these young players come up through the ranks,
Yes.
they learn the club's philosophy,
Yes.
and then they eventually contribute to its success.
It's a beautiful cycle.
It is. It's a beautiful cycle.
And it feels like more and more clubs are trying to adopt this model.
Yeah.
It's not just about buying your way to success anymore.
Right.
It's about building for the future
Yeah.
with a strong core of homegrown talent.
And that brings us to the overall competitive landscape. I mean, this stat blew my mind.
Okay, here.
Over 1,200 different clubs have played in their country's top division
Wow.
over the past decade. That's insane.
That's a lot of clubs.
It's like the whole European football scene is just constantly changing.
Think about it. Over 1,200 clubs, all fighting for that chance to be at the top.
Yeah.
Experiencing those highs and lows of promotion, relegation.
Yeah.
It just shows you how dynamic that European football pyramid really is.
Yeah.
Even the smallest club
Right.
can dream of reaching the top.
I love that idea, right? That this small town club, maybe limited resources, but they've got this passionate fan base.
Totally.
And they can climb through the ranks and challenge those giants of the game.
I love it. And it's not just a fantasy.
Yeah.
It happens. The report even highlighted a couple of examples. Como 1907
Yeah.
and Ipswich Town FC
Oh, yeah.
making these incredible comebacks
Yeah.
back to the top flight after years of struggling.
And it's not just about the clubs themselves, it's about the fans.
The communities.
Yeah, the whole ecosystem around these clubs, right?
Yeah.
When a club like Como or Ipswich succeeds.
It's a win for the underdogs.
It is.
It shows everyone that anything is possible in this sport.
And that's what makes that European football pyramid so special.
I agree.
Even with its flaws, it gives hope.
Opportunity.
Yeah, and it's a constant source of drama and excitement.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about who's moving up and down, it's about the different styles of football that we see across the continent.
Oh.
The report talked about all these different league formats, and honestly, some of them are pretty unique.
Yeah.
Like in Albania, they have this Final Four system to decide the champion.
Yeah.
Can you imagine the intensity of those games?
Wow, every game's a cup final.
Right. And then you've got Malta. They're switching to a split-season format.
Oh.
I have to admit, I'm not totally familiar with that one. How does that work?
So basically, it's a way to keep things exciting, make sure every match matters, even late in the season.
Okay.
So after the initial round-robin phase, the league splits into two groups. A championship group
Okay.
and a relegation group.
So even if a team's struggling in the first half...
They've still got a chance
Yeah.
to turn things around, make a run for the title.
Oh, I like that.
It keeps things interesting.
That's a whole new level of drama
That's
this
what
season. I love it. These different formats are a good reminder that there's no one right way to run a league.
Exactly.
Each country, each region, they have their own unique circumstances.
Priorities, yeah.
Exactly.
And that's what I love about European football.
Yeah.
The sheer variety, the cultures, the styles of play, how the competitions are structured.
It's a global sport,
It is, but with those local roots.
deeply rooted in tradition.
Exactly.
Well said. All right, let's bring it back to the women's game, which, as we've seen, is really experiencing this amazing period of growth
Oh, yeah.
and development.
Yeah.
And one of the really encouraging things the report highlighted was this growing stability
Absolutely.
in the women's top divisions.
Yeah.
More consistent formats, more established league sizes.
So important.
Yeah. As we talked about before, it's crucial for that long-term planning.
Growth, yeah. That stability creates confidence.
Right.
And confidence brings in investment. And we're seeing that investment translate into better facilities, more professional staff.
Yeah.
And, of course, ultimately, a higher quality of play out on the pitch.
It's like this positive feedback loop, you know? Stability leads to investment. Investment leads to improvement. Improvement leads to even more interest from
Is your hubby
more
just fine with-
engagement.
And we're seeing it, right?
Yeah.
In those attendance figures,
Oh, yeah.
the media coverage, more and more young girls
Yeah.
dreaming of becoming pro footballers.
Absolutely, and it's so inspiring to see this shift.
Yeah.
It finally feels like the women's game is getting the recognition it deserves.
I agree.
And the support. And it's not just about the domestic leagues.
Right.
The UEFA Women's Champions League, that's undergoing a major transformation too.
Big time. That new format
Oh, yeah.
with the expanded league stage, more teams competing.
Right.
It's going to make it so much more compelling
Yeah.
and competitive.
Yeah. They're raising the stakes, raising the profile.
Exactly.
Showcasing the best of women's football.
Absolutely.
I love that UEFA's taking these big swings, really investing in the women's game.
It's great to see.
Creating this platform for these incredible athletes to shine.
Yeah. And it's not just about the top clubs either,
Right.
That new second women's club competition alongside the Champions League.
Right.
That gives so many more teams across Europe that chance to experience continental football, to develop their players. It broadens the base of that pyramid.
Right.
Creates a pathway for growth at all levels of the game.
It's like they're building this whole new ecosystem for women's football, nurturing that talent from the grassroots all the way up to the elite.
Totally. And it's really exciting to see.
Really exciting. But let's talk about something that affects both the men's and women's game.
Okay.
The role of technology.
Ah, yes.
In shaping the future of football.
It's a big one, isn't it?
It is. It's a topic that sparks so much debate, so much fascination.
For sure.
From VAR to player tracking systems. You've got virtual reality training tools. I mean, technology is changing everything.
Transforming everything.
About the game, on and off the pitch.
I know. It's like we're in this tech revolution
Yeah.
in football, and it just brings up so many questions.
Right, about tradition versus innovation.
Human judgment versus data.
Exactly.
Well,
exactly. And the UEFA report, it touches on this.
it does.
And this tension, and it highlights how important it is to use technology in the right way.
Responsibly.
Responsibly, yeah. To enhance the game without losing its soul.
It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Embracing the possibilities of tech, but without losing what makes football so great.
The passion.
The drama, those unexpected moments of brilliance.
Exactly.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is.
Harnessing that tech power, but not losing sight of the human element, that's at the core of it all.
It's using data to inform decisions, but not to make them for you.
Exactly.
And it's about tech improving the spectacle, not overshadowing the players and their skill.
That's it.
And it'll be interesting to see how it all evolves in the coming years. As we wrap up this first part of our deep dive, I just feel the sense of optimism
Me too.
about the future of European football.
I agree.
We've seen some challenges for sure,
Definitely.
but we've also seen so much innovation.
Resilience, that shared passion for the game.
The beautiful game.
It's beautiful.
And the UEFA report really captures that. It shows this sport that's in transition.
Yeah.
It's embracing change, adapting to new realities.
And always trying to get better.
And that's what makes it so captivating, right?
It's true. It never stands still.
It never stands still.
It's always evolving.
And it reflects the hopes and the dreams of millions of people around the world.
A global sport. It's something special.
Absolutely. So stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive,
Yes.
we'll be exploring the financial side of the game, those challenges of balancing revenue with sustainability.
It's a tricky one.
It is.
Yeah.
And we'll look at how technology is shaping the future of European football.
So exciting times. So grab a snack, settle in, and get ready for part 2.
It's going to be a fascinating journey.
Absolutely. Welcome back, folks. We're ready to dig deeper into this UEFA report.
You bet. It's like we're peeling back the layers of European football here, getting to the nitty-gritty.
Absolutely. And speaking of nitty-gritty, I'm really curious about the financial side of things.
Me too.
The report talks about record club revenues, but also all these challenges with balancing those big bucks with financial sustainability rules.
It's like a high wire act.
It is. It's a balancing act.
Right.
Clubs, they want success on the pitch, which often means splashing the cash on big-name players.
Right.
But they also need to think about their long-term financial health.
Yeah.
And that's where UEFA's financial fair play rules come in.
Right, like a financial watchdog.
Exactly. UEFA's the referee, making sure everyone's playing by the rules, even off the pitch.
But what are those rules exactly? How do they actually measure a club's financial health?
Well, one of the key things they look at is the salary cost ratio, which basically compares how much clubs are spending on wages compared to their overall revenue.
Makes sense.
Imagine a club spending 90% of their income just on player salaries.
Wow.
That's a huge red flag.
Yeah.
It means there's barely anything left for all the other important stuff, like developing young players,
Right.
improving infrastructure, or even, just paying the bills.
I can just picture a club owner frantically juggling bills and paychecks, hoping the star striker doesn't demand a raise.
It's a tough job, that's for sure.
It is.
And that's exactly why UEFA brought in these regulations, to stop clubs from getting into a ton of debt.
Okay.
It's about promoting responsible financial management across the whole game.
Smart.
And it seems like individual leagues are also stepping up. We're hearing more and more about salary caps and spending limits.
Yeah, it's like everyone's realizing that throwing money at the problem isn't the answer.
Exactly. Building a successful club, a sustainable club, it takes a smart, strategic approach to finances.
It's not just about who can spend the most. It's about who can spend wisely.
And make the most of what they have.
It's like the difference between, I don't know, a flashy impulse buy and a well-planned investment.
I like that analogy.
One might give you a short-term thrill, but the other, that sets you up for long-term success.
Absolutely.
I want to go back to something we talked about earlier, the integration of women's clubs within those men's club structures.
Yeah, interesting development.
It's a trend that's gaining traction, but it does raise some questions about the future of the women's game.
It does. It does. On the one hand, it can give women's teams access to more resources.
Better facilities, more expertise.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like having a big brother with deep pockets who's willing to share.
Right, a big brother who can open doors and create opportunities that might not have existed before.
Exactly.
But like with any siblings, there's always potential for conflict.
Oh, for sure.
How do we make sure the women's game doesn't just get overshadowed or lose its own unique identity in all of this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's about finding that balance. A model that benefits both sides without one side losing out.
A true partnership.
Yeah, a true partnership where the women's game is valued for what it brings to the table.
And respected.
And respected, exactly.
So it's not just about money, it's about creating that supportive, sustainable environment.
Right.
Where the women's game can thrive on its own terms.
On its own terms, I like that.
And it makes me wonder about the fans. What are their thoughts on all these changes? The financial regulations, the new formats, this whole evolving landscape?
It's mixed, Some fans are happy with the changes. They see it as necessary for the long-term health of the sport.
Right.
They understand that tough decisions sometimes have to be made.
To protect the future of the game.
Exactly. It's like a true fan who's willing to make sacrifices for the good of their team.
Makes sense. But what about the fans who aren't so keen on change? What are their concerns?
Well, some worry that these changes will take away from what makes football, football.
Right, like it's losing its soul.
Exactly. They might be worried about what it means for the competition, for the traditions.
The history.
The unique character of their club.
Yeah, it's understandable, right? To feel protective over something you love.
It is. It is.
It's like when your favorite band releases a new album and it sounds different.
Right. It takes a while to adjust.
You need time to get used to it.
Exactly.
But at the end of the day, what matters is the quality, the passion, that connection.
Absolutely.
And what's really important in all this is communication.
Yes.
Between the governing bodies, the clubs, and the fans.
It's a three-way street.
It is, everyone needs to be on the same page, working together to create a future for the game.
A future that respects the past, but embraces the present.
Exactly. I want to go back to that stat about the European football pyramid.
Yeah, the 1,200 clubs.
Over 1,200 different clubs playing in their country's top division in the last decade.
It's mind-boggling.
It is. It's mind-boggling. And it just shows how dynamic and unpredictable European football really is.
Yeah, every season is a new adventure.
It is. Dreams are made, dreams are broken.
Underdogs rise, giants fall.
Yeah, it's that element of surprise that keeps fans coming back for more.
It's like a real-life drama playing out on the pitch every week.
It is. And even with its imperfections, the system has worked for over a century.
It has.
It creates drama, gives smaller clubs hope, and at least in theory, every team has a shot at the top.
That chance to climb the ladder.
Right. It's the power of sporting merit. The best teams rise to the top, regardless of their size or their budget.
We see it all the time. Like the report highlighted Como 1907 and Ipswich Town FC.
Yeah.
Incredible comebacks.
Just a fairy tale.
It is. The underdog coming out on top.
And it's not just about the clubs. It's about the fans, the communities, those whole ecosystems.
I know. And when a club like Como or Ipswich achieves success,
It's a victory for the underdogs.
It shows everyone that anything is possible.
But the pyramid does have its challenges.
Oh, for sure.
We've seen financial mismanagement, clubs struggling to adapt to those higher leagues, and that gap between the top and bottom seems to be getting wider.
You're right, and those are issues that need addressing.
For sure.
But the good news is that UEFA knows about these challenges.
Yeah.
And they're working with national associations and leagues to find solutions to make the pyramid stronger.
And make it last.
It's not an easy fix.
No.
But it's super important for the future of European football.
It's all connected.
It is. The health of the game depends on a healthy pyramid.
A healthy pyramid that gives everyone a chance, fosters competition, and lets clubs dream big.
I like that.
On that note, I want to talk about the increasing length of matches.
Okay.
You mentioned those games going over 100 minutes.
Especially in England.
Yeah, it's sparking a lot of debate.
It is. People are divided.
Yeah, some see it as a good thing, a way to cut down on time wasting.
Right, making sure the fans get their money's worth.
Nobody wants to watch a player pretending to be injured for 5 minutes.
Exactly. It disrupts the flow. So these new directives, they're all about adding on the exact time that's wasted.
Makes sense.
So we actually get to see more football.
But then there's the other side of the coin, the impact on the players.
Yeah, the fatigue.
Yeah, especially with the season already so packed.
Exactly. Adding another 10, 15 minutes to each match.
Could really take its toll.
It's a valid concern. Is it worth the trade-off? Do we prioritize excitement over the player's well-being?
Another football conundrum.
It is.
That balance between the spectacle and looking after the players.
That's a tough one.
Maybe this is just the next stage in the evolution of the game.
Maybe.
Maybe we'll see players training differently, larger squads, substitutes becoming even more important.
Who knows? It's all part of what makes this sport so unpredictable.
And so fun to analyze.
I agree. But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another exciting evolution.
Yeah.
The women's game.
Oh, yeah. It's a story of growth, of innovation, and this real drive to stake a claim.
On the global stage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're just at the beginning.
Oh, for sure.
And the UEFA report really captures this moment. The challenges, the opportunities, the sheer potential.
It's a great time to be a fan of women's football.
It is.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to explore those possibilities even further, looking at the trends, the innovations, the stories that are shaping the future of the women's game.
Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into European club football. And this time, we're putting the spotlight on the women's game.
Which, as we've seen, is having a major moment right now.
Absolutely. Tons of growth, more investment than ever.
It's amazing to see.
And one of the things that stood out in the UEFA report
Yeah.
was that increasing stability we talked about earlier.
Oh, yeah. Super important.
In the women's top divisions,
Yeah.
more consistent formats.
Oh, yeah. Super important.
In the women's top divisions,
Yeah.
more consistent formats.
Solid structures.
Yeah. Which, like we said, is so important for long-term planning and growth.
It creates that foundation for everything else to build on.
It does.
Stability brings confidence, and then that confidence attracts investment.
And we're seeing that investment pay off.
Oh, yeah.
Better facilities.
More professional staff.
Exactly. Which all leads to a higher quality of play on the pitch.
It's this amazing cycle.
It is. Stability leads to investment. Investment leads to improvement. And improvement just fuels more interest and excitement from the fans.
More fans in the stand.
More media coverage.
More young girls dreaming of becoming pro footballers.
It's really inspiring to see this shift.
It is.
Like, the women's game is finally getting the recognition
And the support.
that it deserves.
Yeah.
And it's not just happening in the domestic leagues.
Right?
The UEFA Women's Champions League is also changing in a big way.
That new format,
Yeah.
expanded league stage, more teams battling it out.
Makes it even more competitive.
Yes,
While
sir.
they're raising the stakes.
Raising the profile.
Showcasing the best of the best in women's football.
It's awesome to see UEFA making these bold moves.
They're really investing in the women's game.
Creating a global stage for these amazing athletes.
And it's not just about the top clubs either.
Right.
You've got that new second-tier women's club competition.
Alongside the Champions League.
Yeah.
Which means more opportunities for teams across Europe to play continental football.
Yeah.
Develop their players. It's like
they're building a whole new ecosystem for women's football.
the ground up.
From the grassroots all the way to the elite level.
It's a really exciting time.
It is. But let's talk about something that impacts both the men's and women's game. Technology.
Ah, yes. The tech revolution.
It's transforming football, isn't it?
On and off the pitch.
And it's sparking so many conversations.
About tradition versus innovation.
Human judgment versus all that data.
Yeah, it's a big one.
And the UEFA report touches on this tension, emphasizing responsible use of technology.
Right. Using it to enhance the game.
Without losing the heart of football. It's about finding that balance.
I like to think of it as using tech to improve the spectacle, not to replace the human element, the skill, the artistry of the players.
Exactly. Those moments of magic.
And that's the challenge, isn't it? To use all this amazing tech without forgetting what makes football so special in the first place.
And it'll be really interesting to see how this all plays out in the next few years.
For sure. Exciting times.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I'm feeling optimistic about the future of European football.
Me too.
We've seen the challenges.
But also the innovation, the resilience.
The passion for the beautiful game.
And that's what makes it so compelling, right? The sport's always changing, adapting, pushing boundaries.
It reflects the dreams and aspirations of so many people around the world.
A truly global sport with those deep local roots.
It's been fascinating exploring all of this with you.
It has. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this deep dive into European club football.
We hope you enjoyed it.
And we encourage you to keep those conversations going.
What did you find surprising?
What are your thoughts on the future of the game?
Because ultimately, this sport belongs to all of us.
And until next time, keep the passion alive.
All right, so speed dating, huh? It's making a comeback, and maybe you're thinking about ditching the apps and trying it out.
It's definitely having a moment.
Yeah. Well, hold on tight, because we're going deep into the world of speed dating back in 2009, 2011, here in New York City.
Wow, so that's like pre-Tinder, pre-swiping, right?
Exactly. We've got a first-hand account from someone who was actually a speed dating host during that era. So think, no algorithms, no carefully curated profiles, just pure in-person, face-to-face connection.
Sounds intense.
Oh, it was. This deep dive is going to be a wild ride. Get ready for some hilarious, sometimes even shocking insights into this world. Our source calls the owner of the speed dating company Rich, and he sounds like a real character.
Oh, he is. And character might be putting it mildly. Our host describes Rich as a little chubby in his mid-30s with spiky gelled black hair and a long black leather duster. They even compared him to, like, a Latino Hamburglar with a little more drip.
Okay, I'm picturing it. So, besides the interesting fashion choices, what's fascinating is how Rich built this whole speed dating empire. He was basically the king of New York City speed dating, and it was all thanks to some really clever SEO tactics. And get this was before SEO was even like a thing. He also managed to keep his costs incredibly low, sometimes in ways that were, well, let's just say questionable.
Yeah, his approach to office supplies, for example, is definitely something. He wasn't above acquiring them in some pretty unconventional ways.
Right. Always hustling. It really shows his relentless drive for profit, even if it meant bending the rules a bit. And speaking of hustling, his payment methods were another story.
Oh, yeah.
Our host had to come up with some pretty creative ways to make sure they got paid, like sometimes threatening to cause a mass refund situation if Rich didn't cough up the cash.
Wow. So it's like a power struggle within this chaotic little business.
Definitely. Now, let's get into the actual events themselves. We're not just talking about your typical singles mixer here. Rich had a whole menu of dating experiences, catering to all sorts of niches and demographics. There was professional singles, but then things got really interesting.
Yeah, the variety of events is pretty wild. You had Jewish singles, Indian singles, African-American singles, Asian singles. It gives you a real snapshot of the diverse dating landscape in the city at that time. And then there's the event that really makes you raise an eyebrow. Sugar daddy, sugar baby speed dating.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to get to that. That takes things to a whole other level. It makes you wonder what people were really looking for at these events, you know? Were they hoping to find love, a quick fling, or something a little more transactional?
It's a question our source doesn't fully answer, at least not in this section. They mainly focused on the general admission and Jewish singles events, while two other hosts, Danny and James, handled the African-American and Asian speed dating nights.
Right. Danny and James, they definitely add some color to the story, especially Danny with his gangster persona and his habit of, well, hitting on the attendees.
Yikes.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even in an event as structured as speed dating, you know, individual personalities can really shake things up.
Speaking of shaking things up, let's talk about the venues. Forget about romantic restaurants or trendy bars. These speed dating events were held in some of the most, let's say, character-building dives the East Village had to offer.
Oh, yeah. Our source describes one spot, a supposedly French restaurant, that was so rat-infested, it's amazing anyone stayed for the full 5 minutes. It really gives you a sense of the gritty reality of this speed dating world.
Oh, wow. So it was all about keeping costs low, even if it meant sacrificing, well, everything else.
Pretty much. And that was all part of Rich's business model. He specifically targeted bars and restaurants that were struggling, places that would be happy to trade space and like the cheapest drinks possible for the potential of extra revenue. It was a win-win for him, even if it meant the attendees might be dodging rodents while trying to find love. So we've got the mastermind, the diverse lineup of events, and the, let's just say, unique venues. But what about the experience itself? Let's talk about the pre-event chaos.
Yeah. Imagine a room full of nervous singles, last-minute signups, and our host trying to keep everything from completely falling apart.
Yeah, they had to check people in, hand out name tags and date cards, and basically just be like a one-person calming force.
I can only imagine.
Our source even mentions using humor as an icebreaker, especially with this one go-to joke. Hey, you must be here for the sugar daddy speed dating.
I bet that got some interesting reactions.
For sure. But sometimes the host had to get even more creative to make sure the event ran smoothly. Remember that whole crisis actor thing?
Oh, right. That's a story.
To avoid canceling events with low turnout, our host would occasionally bribe friends to attend and, like, pretend to be enthusiastic daters. Mm-hmm. It's hilarious, but also a little bit shady, all at the same time.
Wow. So how many of those matches were genuine and how many were just friends trying to get a free drink?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? We might never know. But it definitely adds a layer of intrigue to the whole thing. You know, you have this mix of genuine daters looking for love and then these plants just thrown into the mix.
It's like a social experiment gone wrong.
Exactly. Okay, so we've set the stage. The pre-event jitters, the questionable venues, the crisis actors lurking in the shadows. But what happens when that 5-minute timer starts and the speed dating actually begins? That's where things get really interesting.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of pre-app speed dating.
We've got the mastermind, the venues, and all that. But now picture this, the speed dating itself. You've got 5 minutes to make an impression, a timer's ticking, and our host is trying to keep this whole crazy dance moving.
Oh, wow.
Our source describes themselves as part referee, part timekeeper, and part entertainer. They've got a timer, this giant metal bell to signal the rotations, and of course their signature rotate call.
So it's like a game show, but with a potential love connection as the prize.
Right. And our host, with their bell and timer, is watching all these awkward first encounters, those little moments of connection, and I'm sure some truly cringeworthy moments.
Yeah, I bet.
They talk about everything from successful pairings to this guy who projectile vomited during a date. And then there's the story about our host befriending a mortician at one of these events.
Wow. That's a story for sure.
It is. It's what makes this account so compelling. We're not just getting the overview of speed dating. We're getting these little glimpses into the lives of the people who were part of this whole scene.
You're right. It's like we're there with them.
So one question I had was there any kind of screening process? Did Rich, vet the attendees at all?
That's a good question.
The answer is, surprisingly, no. There is pretty much no vetting, which led to a very interesting mix of people.
Oh, wow.
It made things really unpredictable. You really never knew who you were going to be paired with. It's like this big social experiment where anything could happen.
I see what you mean.
You can meet someone amazing, but it also meant there were some, let's just say, unique characters. The source talks about this one guy, a repeater, who showed up every few weeks hoping to find the one. And even a Moldovan giant who didn't speak English.
That's incredible.
Right. And all these people were drawn to speed dating, each with their own motivations and expectations.
It makes sense.
But those expectations didn't always align, especially when it came to gender dynamics. Our source says that women often left early feeling like the men weren't meeting their standards of professionalism.
That's interesting. So even in this setting, where it's supposed to be about quick connections, societal expectations and gender roles still played a big part.
Yeah, it's a reminder of the power imbalances in dating, something that's only become more apparent with dating apps.
True. So after all the chaos of the event, there's still this crucial step, tallying up the matches. I was really surprised by how low-tech this process was. It was all pen and paper, very old-school matchmaking.
Right. Our host is describing themselves hungover, exhausted, going through all these date cards, trying to figure out who liked who. It's so different from the algorithms and instant notifications we're used to.
I kind of like it, though. It feels more human.
Me too. And those date cards weren't just for marking matches. The back of the cards became a space for people to write down notes about their dates. And let me tell you, some of those notes were pure gold.
Oh, really?
Like, our source mentions some gems like Cindy Big Natty's daddy issues next to Derek Loser owns lizard. It's hilarious, but it also gives you insight into those snap judgments we make when we meet someone new.
Oh, totally.
They even shared some of these with their roommates, so it became like a post-event comedy night. But, beyond the laughs, those notes show a lot about the psychology of speed dating.
Absolutely. It shows how fast we categorize people based on like one interaction. First impressions are everything in the speed dating world.
Exactly. Now, there were two types of events our host dreaded: Indian singles events and sugar daddy, sugar baby speed dating. These events were unique because they involved different cultural nuances and, well, power dynamics.
Yeah, I was wondering about those.
Let's start with the Indian singles events. Our host, who identifies as a drunk white girl, admits feeling out of their depth in these settings. They describe a much more serious atmosphere, with people really looking for a life partner.
That makes sense.
It shows how cultural expectations around dating can be so different. For some people, this was a serious thing, not just a fun experiment.
Right, high stakes.
Our host, who's used to breaking the ice with jokes and free drinks, had to really adjust their approach in these events. They even tell a story about a guy who got angry because there weren't enough women. He was demanding more female participants, not more samosas. It was a lot of pressure.
Wow, that's intense.
Now, on to the sugar daddy, sugar baby events. These were less common, but definitely came with their own unique set of challenges and, honestly, some ethical gray areas.
Yeah, these are the events that kind of make you go,
Our host's own boss and his friends would participate in these events as sugar daddies, which makes you question everyone's motivations.
Right. It blurs the lines between professional and personal.
And according to the source, some of the women at these events might have been sex workers. It creates this ethically ambiguous situation with people looking for different things, and our host stuck in the middle trying to manage it all.
That sounds really complicated.
It was so different from the regular speed dating events where, at least in theory, people were looking for romance. At the sugar daddy events, it was much more transactional. The power dynamics were just out there.
I can see why the host dreaded those.
Speaking of transactions, let's move on to a story that's pure entrepreneurial genius with a side of moral flexibility. The singles party.
Oh, yeah, I remember you mentioning those.
These weren't about timed dates. This was just about throwing a bunch of singles into a nightclub.
And hoping for the best.
Exactly. Rich had this down to a science. Rent a struggling nightclub on a slow night, charge a lot for cover, and just watch the money come in.
So smart, but also kind of shady.
Oh, for sure. But get this, our host and this gorgeous British woman who they worked with realized they could pocket the cash from the door. They were basically scamming the scammer.
That's amazing.
And to make it even crazier, the nightclub manager, who they described as this bar rescue John Taffer type with a coke habit, would constantly try to check on them. It was like something out of a movie.
Wow. So we've got the events, the venues, all that. But what happens when things go wrong? Who do all those unhappy daters complain to? Well, this is where we meet Jen, the ultimate customer service mirage.
I've been waiting for this part. Jen is where things get truly weird. Rich, always trying to cut corners, created this whole fictional character to handle complaints. Her name was Jen, a 25-year-old white woman with a fake LinkedIn profile and a profile picture that included a sombrero. It's insane.
Can't make that up.
I know, right? It was brilliant, but also totally ridiculous. This middle-aged Ecuadorian man hiding behind a computer, pretending to be a young woman to deal with angry customers. It just shows how far he was willing to go to protect his business.
That's incredible. So did Jen actually work?
Well, she definitely had her work cut out for her, especially after this disastrous Valentine's Day event. Rich basically scammed a bunch of people by promising speed dating, but just throwing a regular party. The complaints came flooding in, and poor Jen had to deal with all of it. Yeah, it makes you wonder about online identity and authenticity. Like, in the digital age, are we really talking to real people? Or are we just interacting with carefully constructed or even completely made-up personas? The Jen situation is funny, but also a little creepy, you know?
Totally. Makes you think twice about those customer service reps you chat with online.
Exactly. Okay, before we spiral into an existential crisis, let's take a break from the world of Jen and speed dating scams and talk about some of our hosts' other side hustles. because speed dating was just one chapter in their interesting career path.
Right, got to pay the bills somehow.
These side hustles included everything from bar trivia host to a parade elf, which they skipped, to an art gallery bartender. Each gig came with its own set of challenges, funny stories, and of course, some questionable decisions.
So a typical day in the life then.
Pretty much. This one story about the bar trivia suitcase is particularly memorable. Our host gets home after a long night of trivia, drops their heavy equipment bag in the hallway, and then their roommate trips over it and screams in pain. Classic roommate drama. And then there's the time they decided to prank their roommate while candy flipping by hiding behind the oven for like 90 minutes.
It's a good reminder that even amidst the hustle of all these gigs, there was still room for fun and maybe some bad choices influenced by psychedelics.
Sounds about right.
So we've covered it all. The events, the venues, those awkward moments, the scams, the side hustles. It's like a whirlwind tour of this very specific time in dating culture.
And a world that feels both long gone and weirdly familiar.
Right. We've laughed, we've cringed, we've questioned everything we thought we knew about online identity, but now it's time to ask the big question. What can we learn from this crazy journey into the world of pre-app speed dating? So we spent this deep dive exploring this pre-app speed dating world.
Yeah, it's been quite a ride.
Right. We've met Rich, heard about all these crazy events and the memorable characters our host encountered. But what does it all mean? Like, what can we actually learn from this? Well, for me, it's the contrast between the structured nature of speed dating and the total unpredictability of human interaction. Like, Rich tried to create this system for finding love, but then you've got projectile vomit and crisis actors and a Moldovan giant who doesn't speak English.
It's like you can't force chemistry, you know? But even though our source left this world behind, they seem to miss it. Like, there's a certain fondness for those days.
I think you're right. There was a rawness and authenticity to that era of dating, something that maybe gets lost when we're all curating our online profiles.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if we've given up some of the thrill of the unknown in our search for the perfect match.
It's something to think about, you know? While you're swiping through those profiles, writing those clever little bios, ask yourself, is there something to be said for those organic in-person encounters, even if they're awkward?
Right, like those awkward first dates, those unexpected moments of connection. Those are things you can't get from an app.
Exactly. So maybe there's a middle ground, a way to balance the convenience of dating apps with the authenticity of, just meeting someone in the wild.
I think so. The biggest takeaway for me is that no matter how you approach dating, just embrace the chaos.
Exactly. You can't control everything. And sometimes the best moments are the ones that completely defy expectations.
And hey, who knows? Maybe somewhere out there, Rich is still running speed dating events, Jen is still responding to complaints, and a whole new generation is experiencing the joys and the awkwardness of 5-minute dating.
The cycle continues. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of speed dating.
It's been a trip. Until next time, happy dating, everyone.
Just for the schadenfreude if they failed miserably. But no, generally, I'd love to see them get involved just to see what would happen with someone who is literally coming from a customer experience focused point of view. 100%, that is all they care about. Are you hyped when you open your Robinhood app? See someone with that level of focus go into sort of betting would be fascinating.
I think there's an interesting parallel to this, and maybe a good sort of thing to kind of wrap up our discussion on. Not to blame the role of host for you, Brad, but sports betting has become an SGP market in certainly in the US, the UK, and most of Europe now, and increasingly it'll be globally. So, and we've kind of convinced ourselves as the industry that is, well, certainly myself and Brad, I don't want to speak for you, Trench, but we've convinced ourselves that is the kind of the present and the future of sports betting. It's kind of a progression. It's a new type of semi-new type of gambling product. It provides a different kind of user experience. It is both incremental to the kind of share of wallet, but also incremental to the player base, and it brings new people in. SGP is the future. Right. Absolutely. Signed up to that.
The football pools of this generation, it will be accepted universally, might be.
But what we got there is, so that's where we're at. There's been no innovation around like straight betting, for want of a better expression. There must be a better expression than that. There's been no innovation around that since Betfair, right? And in like the year 2000 or 1999 or whatever it was, it's exactly the same. Everything, the user experience is the same. Everything is the same. But that's Betfair, right? That's cash out was just kind of like Betfair functionality eventually rolling out into the fixed odds market, and and it came from Betfair anyway. Don't call me to court to argue that point. It's just an opinion. But it's that's just kind of the final realization of that sort of Betfair trading mechanic going into the fixed odds market. But aside from that, there's been no innovation. It's the same kind of thing. So, and even in really simple kind of UI terms, there's been nothing. People, where is the Uber of gambling? Where is the Airbnb of gambling? Right? But it doesn't exist. That sort of stuff doesn't exist. So the idea that this is how it is forevermore is ludicrous to me. So could Robinhood come in and shake that up? Could another firm come in and shake that up? Could we see a big extension of that? I do think we could. And I think the market that could exist there could also be big and could be bigger than it is today. If 60-70% of revenues are now coming from SGP, that doesn't mean that 30% is as big as it's ever going to get now. That could also grow too, as you take money from different leisure activities, as you take money maybe from day trading, you take money from different areas where people currently spend it, whether that's mobile game, wherever it is. So, I think there is the potential to innovate and create a new user experience around singles betting, certainly in the US as well, where it feels very kind of old fashioned and historic. That type of betting, it's kind of how your grandpappy bet, isn't it? That sort of betting in the US. So I think there's definitely places that sports betting can go to and can expand to, and there's white space and areas of innovation that can be pushed to. And I cannot see that coming from the existing players. The risk reward is just completely skewed there. Why would they even try? And that's only going to come from outside in. It may come from Robinhood. It very probably won't. It may come from somewhere else. But as you say, it's going to need to be a fairly high capitalized group. But I don't think we're at settled. I think we are at settled state, but I don't think this is where we're going to stay forever in terms of, I think, to come back to the earlier discussion, I think the bits that exist outside of regulation is what's going to start pushing that. So you're going to have, increasing experimentation, increasing kind of blending of the worlds of gaming and crypto and various other elements that they're creating just these new experiences almost by accident sometimes. And it's going to be attractive to different cohorts of players and different types of people and in different ways and for different reasons, combining, shitcoin trading with sports betting with some kind of simple gaming mechanic. These things sound buzzwordy and conferencey and stupid, but they absolutely can happen and probably will happen in the next relatively limited time frame, I think, because so little has happened in the last 20 years, so little. The apps still resemble apps from 2002 largely. The experience of betting on them outside of bet builders is largely the same. In play still feels very similar. Everything is kind of the same, just better. And it feels untenable to me that this is how we will remain for the next 20 years.
Well, I'd say, for the singles market, it's hyper optimization has been sort of the only route. And I would say that because there is a kind of whiff of Robinhood about the UI, sort of the one who sort of really has doubled down on this is Sport Trade. And I'd say that Sport Trade's best elements are actually the ones where it's imitating a sportsbook. Because if you ask anyone who runs sportsbook products at all, most important thing, uptime.